Hello everybody! I've not made a video like this in a while, so some of you may not know this. Prager University, aka PragerU, is not a university. It's a right-wing YouTube channel which tries to seem more credible by falsely calling themselves a university. They are funded by conservative oil barons and anonymous donors. Personally, I disclose all of my donors at the end of each video. That's what the outro is. But I'm just some silly socialist and not a prestigious fake online university with a strong right-wing bias. That bias, by the way, is the reason I'm talking to you today. Because they make videos with conservative opinions in them. So I am making a video on their video. The one we will watch today is titled, "Is Communism Moral?" And initially I didn't want to make a video on that. I thought a video purely about morals would be mostly opinion based, and you can't prove an opinion wrong. But leave it to PragerU to manage to make a video on a moral question and make enough factual mistakes for me to make a video on. The video starts with Dennis Prager saying that your actions matter more than your words, and I think anyone can agree with that. If you say you are conservative, but you support fascist policies and feature white supremacists as hosts, then that behavior clearly outweighs all Judeo-Christian values you claim to hold. Completely random example, by the way, no accusations here. Dennis goes on saying that the same applies to governments. Their actions outweigh the words. As a communist, I would say material reality outweighs ideological purity, which is just the same thing with more fancy words. Also, of course, the obvious example of this is America being pro-freedom and democracy and stuff, while establishing fascist dictatorships all over South and Central America. Prager then explains capitalism.
The individual pursues success to the best of his abilities, that's capitalism, versus everyone shares everything equally, that's communism.
And if you are a communist or a capitalist, or know anything about either communism or capitalism, you will notice that, well, these definitions have issues. The main one being that they're straight up wrong. Capitalism is an economy in which businesses are privately owned. That's it. Though commonly we mean free market capitalism, which has competition, so I guess that kind of matches this definition. Of course, this also shows a core problem with capitalism. For example, my boss pursuing success means I have to work overtime. Like, everyone pursuing happiness sounds great, but practically that way people will stand in the way of each other's pursuit. So a better definition would be capitalism is an economic system based on ruthless competition instead of cooperation. This definition of communism was probably found in a book from a library in a preschool. It's that bad. There are different definitions on communism. The orthodox Marxist take is that it is a utopic society in which everything has been overproduced so much that there is practically infinite amounts of everything, making money, trading, and even the concept of owning things a thing of the past. That's the OG Marxist answer. Nowadays, most people don't mean this when they say communism. And most even think that superabundance, which is the fancy word for having infinite amounts of everything, is not possible at all. There is certainly nobody who has that society as a tangible political goal. Instead, people are socialists who want socialism, which then at some stage turns into communism. Because of leftism, the socialists split around 100 years ago, one faction continuing to call themselves socialists, and the other one adopting the name communists. So, in addition to the Marxist answer, communism can mean a state or party which is run by communists. Some states that are commonly called communist are the Soviet Union and China. As I said, communists are just socialists with a different label. Socialism is of course a system in which the economy, that being the businesses and housing, as well as systems of distribution, are run by the community. So the workers own a factory, not a boss. That way, if they work overtime, they profit, not the boss. So a definition of communism would be that it's a society which tries to put the average people in charge of the economy and state instead of a rich minority. I say tries to because even in the most charitable light, they didn't always reach that goal for one reason or another. So, looking at these updated definitions, which one do you think sounds better? Personally, I think communism sounds better, but I got a clear bias. And with Dennis Prager's definitions, communism still sounds better, but he adds that capitalism
that has produced freedom, and it alone has lifted millions from poverty, while communism has kept millions impoverished and, without exception, crushed freedom.
Okay, where do I start? The beginning may be a good idea. He says capitalism produced freedom, which doesn't exactly mean anything, because what freedom means is really arbitrary. So that statement can't be proven or disproven because it's so vague. And if it can't be proven, it's a bad argument. But the next statement, that capitalism lifted millions of people out of poverty, can be proven. And it's basically true. Capitalism is really good at producing things, mainly because it financially rewards finding ways to squeeze profit out of workers. My only issue is that he says it alone, because that part is a lie. Because guess what? Non-capitalist nations also lifted people out of poverty. The Russian peasants of 1917 had nowhere near the quality of life that Soviet citizens had by 1991. Then he is pretending that nothing but capitalism can produce things and that the Soviets somehow kept people impoverished. But guess what? In socialism, a factory still produces things, and standards of living still improve over time. Look at any socialist nation. They always had improving standards of living year after year, when they weren't invaded by capitalist forces, that is. Oh, and this statement that communists crushed freedom, it's true, I'm afraid. Here you see the Soviets crushing the freedom of the Ninth Army to take Stalingrad. And here they're taking away the freedom of fascist militaries to occupy other countries. And of course, most tragically, here you can see them taking away Hitler's freedom to commit a genocide. Truly the horrors of communism. Dennis then says that communism leads to evil.
Communism, whatever its stated intentions, leads to evil.
What that is supposed to mean, I don't know. I guess evil means communists scare me because under communism I could no longer get paid by fracking billionaires to spread lies on the internet. Then he explains that because of the American education system, most people don't know how evil communism is. Which I find really funny because anti-Soviet propaganda like Animal Farm is literally required reading in all schools in the US. And that's not because of its literary brilliance. That's because they wanted to discredit communism. Not to mention the fact that on the internet, Stalin killed more than Hitler is literally a meme. And you hear Stalin killed 20 million, Hitler only killed 6 all the time. And even if we assume the Stalin death count is correct, and I will get into that later, Hitler started a world war that killed 70 million. Suddenly it's not evil Stalin who's the greatest monster in history. It's Hitler. Hitler is the worst person. And also keep in mind that the person to topple Hitler's empire was Stalin. Then Mr. Prager explains why he is telling us all these things, which is fair enough. And then he names some, well, he says that they are facts.
Now some facts, based on the authoritative Black Book of Communism, written by 6 French scholars and published in the United States by Harvard University Press. Here are the numbers of people murdered by communist regimes, not soldiers, ordinary civilians. Vietnam, 1 million. Eastern Europe, 1 million. Ethiopia, 1.5 million. North Korea, 2 million. Cambodia, 2 million. The Soviet Union, 20 million. China, 65 million. And the numbers are conservative.
Okay, right. First of all, those numbers are not conservative. They are the highest scholarly estimate there is. I already made a video on the Black Book of Communism, so I will just link that from at the end of this video. The TLDR version is that 5 out of the 6 authors distanced themselves from the book because the lead author, Stéphane Courtois, acted unethically and unscientific because he really wanted to reach the number 100 million. When you are doing research and you already know what results you want to have, then you're not doing research, you're creating propaganda. There are many examples I could give, but I think the worst offense of that book is when there was a drought in China, not a drought made by Mao or by the party, it was completely natural. and then the harvest was bad, and people had less to eat, which dropped the birth rate. And this drop in the birth rate is considered murder by that book. Because there is clearly no difference between mouse strangling babies by hand and people having less sex. There are about 20 minutes worth of errors and lies in the Black Book of Communism, and that video already exists, so I'm leaving it at that. Dan then explains that communism is eviler than just killing. Examples of its evil include
the systematic stripping people of their right to speak freely, to worship freely, to start a business, or even to travel without party permission. No non-communist judiciary or media.
Okay, let's look at this. Right to speak freely, which we don't have either. Want an example? When I made a video on the movie Ants, it was literally deleted because some CEO had the rights to it. I was not allowed to speak about it on my channel. And PragerU constantly complains that they are being censored by YouTube because their videos can't be watched by little children because of the topics they discuss, like genocide and stuff. Editing Wiki here also see laws about slander and libel. Freedom to worship freely is given in all socialist nations. Yeah, sure, the state didn't make churches tax exempt, but anyone could worship whatever they want to. Just like here, except more fair. Right to start a business. This is a myth as well. Most socialist nations allowed for the forming of collective businesses. Yeah, you can't run one like a dictator as you do in capitalism. Stuff is owned and run collectively. That's what socialism is. Also, starting a business is one of the least important rights I have. I'd gladly trade that for a more fair world. Right to travel freely. This one is funny, because with the exception of the EU, you literally don't have free travel. You need this thing called a visa, and if you don't have one, then you can't travel. Anyone who ever crossed an international border knows this. America even wants to build a wall to keep immigrants out. They literally want to prevent free travel, while complaining about countries preventing free travel. Pick one, you buffoon, not both together. Non-communist judiciary. I love this one because I can say the same thing about capitalism. How dare the US not offer me a non-capitalist judiciary? Like, come on, what does that even mean? Like, yeah, communist nations have different justice systems, but that's how it is. Different countries do justice differently. And I have a video on justice systems planned, so subscribe to see that once I make it. The last point is free media. And I mean, yeah, when the USSR made the media free, they started attacking each other, and the union collapsed. So that was a thing, don't really have anything to add to that. Essentially, for the rest of the video, Dennis Prager is complaining about rights which you theoretically have in capitalism, but not in socialism. And to that I have a quote from the man who built the Berlin Wall. This was right after the collapse of the socialist world. I hear about the new freedom that people are enjoying in Eastern Europe. But how do you define freedom? Millions of people in Eastern Europe are now free from employment, free from safe streets, free from healthcare, free from social security. What I am trying to say is that in socialist nations, certain things can be taken for granted which can't be under capitalism. The USSR established universal healthcare after a world war. The USA still doesn't have it. Then he says that toxic masculinity, the patriarchy, and systemic racism don't exist. But I'm fed up with this shit already, so I'm just gonna end the video here. How do you like this style of video? If you liked it, you'd be happy to know there's a second video like this one. It's about basic economics. Also, at some point on screen you'll get the link to that one and the video on the Black Book of Communism. On screen you can see which special interests paid me to make this video, like Comrade Asshole, Darius the Bird, Eric Betts, VCTR7, Attila Nemetz, Bryn Floss, Carissa, Jam and Pineapple, Daniel Hyman, Daphne, Dr. Grimm, Emily Marigold Klassen, Gavi Gita, Herdington Gerdington, Josh C, Joshua Clark, Glastrup, Masija Rojak, Nane Epema, Neil Banderi, Nicholas Wiggins, Ollie, Pote, Raymond DeVille, Roman Bryant, Sean Murphy, Stairmaster Chef, Stephen and Trey.